Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
All right, let's go to the next section of the video.
You know, this case, I think, has gone unsolved for so many years because the girls just vanished.
Broward Sheriff's Office cold case homicide detective Andrew Giannino has spent 2 years trying to untangle the mystery of how Barbara and Darlene began a seemingly ordinary day in 1975 in Hollywood, and by nightfall were murdered and left in an area off of US 27 on the edge of the Everglades known as Andytown.
All right, Tom, what do you know about Andytown?
Oh, Andytown, probably the precursor for the film Porky's, the foreign Porky's. It wasn't like Porky's. It was a small place, but it was a gas station and had a bar in there and a package store and a few other sundries too. And I think it was built right after World War II. A guy named Andy Poulos owned it, and then I think one of his relatives inherited after he passed away shortly before these girls murdered. But it was the middle of nowhere, and I probably wouldn't even know it except my dad worked security for Florida Power and Light. Excuse me. And he would go out, and the substation was right across the street on the east side of the road. And he would check those areas, and he would inspect them and make sure that there was, because that was one of the big grid systems out that way. So the Andytown substation. Otherwise, it's kind of lost to history. It still ends up on the map for some reason, and it's a very, very remote area out there at the time. There was really no reason, unless you're going north and south on 27, which takes you just to Lake Okeechobee, which is extremely desolate. So very few people traveled it back in those days. That was the end of the world. There was no I-75. It precedes it. So it was a 2-lane road. Actually, it may have been 4, but you could disappear off that pretty easily. And there were other girls dumped there, and unless you see a set of headlights coming, you're not going to get caught. West of Andytown, it's just a big, vast expanse of Everglades, and that's not. It's like a wheat field of water. I guess it's the best way to describe that, Everglades. So it's flat and open, and people used to fish out there and used to get some encampments a little bit further out on those, but that was about it. And then very few roads actually went all the way out to 27. That is that north-south boundary, or that roadway. So one was 84, right near where Andytown was. 4 miles north of that intersection is where these girls' bodies were dumped. So it's really fortuitous that they were discovered within hours of being murdered, because those biological light processes didn't destroy that evidence that you talked about before. But certainly heat, UV, rain, all sorts of things could have played havoc on that. Any biological material, any DNA that would have been there, and we're talking probably touch DNA, because we know MVAC's involvement. They would have, as a cold case, have worked this with a semen sample that was left behind, and it, at all accounts, don't indicate that's the case. So it was, as Rob shows, touch DNA that happened on this. Yeah,
that's absolutely incredible. And we also have to remember that this is June. The middle of June in Florida. So so let's just take this scenario and talk about how, like you said, how fortuitous it was that they were found the next day by a family that was headed out down that road and going fishing. So if they had been found, say, a day or 2 days after they had actually been found, so from the time of death to when they were found was actually probably less than 24 hours, and most of it was nighttime. So, it's going to be cooler. It's still going to be hot in Florida, that time of year. But if they had gone even another 24 hours, what would the decay of the bodies been like?
Yeah, any number of things could have happened there. So I think about 13 hours later is when they were found, in estimation, maybe less than that, maybe down to about 7 in the in-between. So that's a miracle that happened. If they'd thrown them in the water, that would have degraded it. But the animal activity would have started pretty quickly. So the decomp hadn't started real severely yet. And I'm surprised it hadn't, because That's a pretty active animal area. The only thing is that it's so open compared to being further west into the Everglades themselves, which is impossible to get to. It sounds great that you have to get out there on an airboat. Otherwise, there's no getting out to those areas, and it's all contained and canalized and everything like that. But yeah, it would have. I mean, easily a month will strip up a deceased person down to a skeleton in Florida, above ground easily, and the animal activity to scatter those bones really quickly. So yeah, one day would have done quite a lot to degrade that.
Yeah. So, and also remember this case. Well, you can't really remember because we haven't talked about it yet, but this case was essentially solved because of DNA. Now, something that's really, really critical to understand is that as the body decomposes, you have all of the decomposition, for lack of a better word, it kind of soaks into the clothing, and any kind of touch DNA that would have been from the perpetrators on the outside of the victim's clothing would have been saturated with all of this body decomposition, and so and it seeps into the clothing, and just from specifically on the MVAC, but I'm sure swabbing is dramatically affected by this as well. Is that when you try to extract or try to collect the surface DNA, which would have been from the perpetrators, like grabbing the victims, say they wanted to move the victims out of the van where, supposedly that's where they were murdered, grab them by the ankles or whatever, that body decomposition would saturate into the clothing, and it makes it virtually impossible to collect the touch DNA that we're talking about. So it's like you said, boy, even though this took almost 50 years to solve, the fact that they were found so quickly is just an absolute miracle, and that's a critical part of this whole scenario. And I'm sure as the cold case detectives looked at this and they looked at the evidence, they're saying, what are the chances that we can get this? And that's a major part of it. Sometimes we wonder why cases can't get solved quicker. Well, a lot of times it's because the evidence just will not reveal, the perpetrator. And part of it is because of, like I said, decomposition, just animal activity. Water is a huge problem. Sunlight, it all starts breaking down the DNA. And when you're looking at DNA, and that's the primary way that we solve cold cases nowadays. So yeah, just absolutely incredible. So, okay, let's go back to the video. Again, this video is incredible. If you haven't seen it, well, you'll see the majority of it here with us, but you can also go just to Broward Sheriff's Office, their web or their YouTube channel, and see this entire thing. So, okay, here's the next section.
They never heard from again. There's no technology to trace. It was a very hard case to solve from the onset.
For decades, homicide detectives have stared into the eyes of these two children who had recently completed 8th grade and wondered who could have treated them with such indifference and violence.
I think what made this case live on and resonate with investigators is the innocence of these kids. I mean, they were your neighbor. They were your daughter. They were your sister.
When the murders happened, there were newspaper articles and media coverage. A year and a half later, the case turned cold. It has now become Detective Giannino's mission to solve this case.
I was supposed to retire in June of last year. As we progressed in the investigation and followed different leads, I just couldn't leave it for somebody else to pick up on. I've just got too much of my own life invested in it.
That investment is paying off. When BSO's Cold Case Homicide Unit first began working on this video in early 2023, there were piles of reports, dozens of crime scene photos, several boxes of evidence, and Barbara and Darlene's clothing. But there were few tangible leads in the murders.
All right, man. So the first thing I want to ask you is, based on your experience and working with other investigators, especially when they're working cold cases. I mean, it's another thing working an active case, it's just seeing the violence. And it's amazing to me that the longer that we do this, just when you look at some of the violence that humans can do to other humans, it's just, you think you've seen it all, and then it just gets worse. And so when the detective was talking about, it became personal to him. So based on your experience in working with all these investigators, how does that affect each one of these detectives and CSIs that work these cases?
Yeah, the VT, vicarious trauma, and it takes a part of them. And I've known guys gone to their graves still working this in retirement. It's really well epitomized in the movie The Pledge with Jack Nicholson. And not to give away the plot, but what happens in these, you begin to live it, and it's hard to put it away, and it stays with you. So it's tough on those investigators, and it's really tough on the ones that really care and they work hard to solve this. And it's a very traumatic process for them. And then they have a love-hate relationship because they can't put this down. They're criticized often from it. I actually put this down, meaning solve the case. They're criticized for it. They get to hear things in the press like botch the case or Keystone Cops or things like that. And they're working with the resources they're given. If we show the graphic where that patchwork quilt of county properties lay out, it's almost impossible to figure out how this Rorschach ink blot of map is laid out, and you're not even allowed to go in the other jurisdiction really without having some kind of authority or coordinate with other agencies, and they have casework to do. Just even that just degrades and erodes that investigation. It makes it very, very difficult. And of course, there's everybody's trying to solve things. They work together very well back then, but you still have problems. Just things back in those days, you didn't have email. You couldn't even make long distance phone calls unless you logged that in accordingly. So these things all go to degrading that and how tough it is on somebody. And you do what you can do with the resources. A couple of things that he mentioned about nothing to track back then. In those days, the only thing that you had was vehicle registration. So surely they went back and they contacted Tallahassee and they saw every white van they could and tried to find every lead possible. But how many white vans existed back in Broward County back in the day? And they were probably looking at a very tight circle from where the girls disappeared from. That was probably the competent part of the investigation. But if it was Dania working this or in conjunction with Broward Sheriff's Office, I don't know. But that's the only way you could have database that. Another thing they mentioned is after a year and a half, they're forgotten. Well, the only reason that lasted a year and a half was because other girls were murdered, and the writers of the day were trying to put together stories to make linkage and get public awareness out on it. But that story falls apart. Remember, this is the golden age of serial killers, although I would doubt this doesn't seem to be a serial killer. This seems to be something other than the classic serial killer model there. The girls were shot. So what you're really talking about is a news cycle of about 7 days, more like 5, and then they're forgotten, had it not be for this other. So that's it. And if you really want to understand what that is, watch the film Memories of Murder, that Korean film, and it's tough to watch because it's in Korean language and there's different, but that's what those cops and detectives live with, and they're born into it and they work, and those are what was described in The Wire as real police. I mean, those guys are really my heroes, and I tried to emulate and learn every bit I could from them. And they have a hard life, and that's why so many of them die young. It's why so many of them crawl into a bottle, and unfortunately why so many of them end their lives by their own choice, is they have to live with this stuff. And it doesn't help when people are criticizing the outside. It's a tough charter, but that's the life we all chose.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.